The moment Zane Zimmerman stepped into the grand ballroom of the Bellevue Hotel, he regretted his decision to attend. The crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the sea of unfamiliar faces, all laughing and mingling with the ease of people who actually wanted to be there. Zane did not. He had spent the past 72 hours locked in meetings, negotiating a merger that would cement his position as one of the most influential CEOs in the tech industry. Sleep-deprived and mentally drained, he would have preferred a quiet evening at home with financial reports and a glass of scotch, but Marcus had been insistent, and Zane owed him. They'd been friends since college, long before Zane's startup had exploded into Zimmertech, the fastest-growing AI security company in the country. Marcus had loaned him the initial seed money that made it all possible, believing in him when banks wouldn't look twice. So when Marcus called that afternoon, reminding Zane about his birthday celebration and saying, "You promised you'd be here," Zane had dragged himself into a suit and shown up. "There he is," Marcus's booming voice cut through the crowd. "The elusive Zane Zimmerman graces us with his presence." Zane forced a smile as Marcus approached, champagne in hand, dressed in a tailored navy suit that complemented his athletic build. At 35, Marcus still had the exuberant energy of the college quarterback he once was. "Sorry I'm late," Zane said, accepting the glass Marcus thrust into his hand. "The Carlton deal." "Save it," Marcus cut him off with a good-natured grin. "No business talk tonight. You're here to have fun, remember what that is?" Before Zane could respond, Marcus was guiding him through the crowd, introducing him to people whose names blurred together. He shook hands, made small talk, and checked his watch when no one was looking. He'd give it an hour, maybe two. Make an appearance, wish Marcus a happy birthday, then slip away. The thought was the only thing keeping him sane. "You look like you're plotting your escape," a voice observed, breaking through his thoughts. Zane turned to find a woman standing beside him, holding a glass of white wine. She wasn't dressed like the other women in the room, who sparkled in designer gowns and dripped with jewelry. Instead, she wore a simple black dress that fell just above her knees, her only accessory a delicate silver necklace with a small pendant. Her chestnut hair was pulled back in a loose updo, a few tendrils framing a face with intelligent hazel eyes that regarded him with amusement. "Is it that obvious?" he asked, surprised by his own honesty. She laughed, a genuine sound that somehow stood out against the artificial titters echoing around them. "Only to another reluctant attendee. I've been tracking the exits myself." She extended her hand. "Vivian Bellamy." Zane Zimmerman. He took her hand, noting the firm grip and the absence of the fluttery giggle that usually followed his introduction. No recognition flickered in her eyes, no sudden shift in demeanor that suggested she'd just mentally calculated his net worth. "So, Zane Zimmerman, how do you know our birthday boy?" she asked, taking a sip of her wine. "College roommates." "You?" "I'm his sister's best friend from high school. Sophia couldn't make it from London, so she insisted I come in her place to, quote, make sure Marcus doesn't do anything stupid on his birthday." Vivian smiled. "So far, he's behaving, although the night is young." Something about her easy manner made Zane relax slightly. "And how's the exit tracking going?" "There are 3. Main entrance, service door by the kitchen, and fire exit near the restrooms. The service door is our best bet. Less chance of being intercepted by well-meaning socialites wanting to discuss their investment portfolios." Zane raised an eyebrow. "You seem to have given this some thought." "I've been here for an hour already. Plenty of time for reconnaissance." For the first time that evening, Zane found himself genuinely smiling. "And what would make you want to escape a party like this? Most people would kill for an invitation." Vivian's eyes scanned the room, taking in the glittering crowd. "Let's just say I find most of these events exhausting. The same conversations, the same people trying to impress each other with stories about their summer homes and latest acquisitions." She turned back to him with a slight shrug. "I'd rather be home reading a good book." "What kind of books?" Zane found himself asking, genuinely curious. Currently making my way through a series on architectural history. I'm an architect, she added, though not nearly as successful as most of the people in this room seem to be. Before Zane could respond, a commotion at the entrance drew their attention. A group of late arrivals had appeared, led by a tall, striking woman in a red dress who immediately commanded the attention of everyone nearby. Cassandra Moore, Vivian said under her breath. Marcus's ex. This should be interesting. Ex? What's she doing here? Marcus invited her. They've managed to stay friends, which is more than most people can say about their exes, though I suspect she still carries a torch for him. Zane watched as Cassandra made her way toward Marcus, air kissing his cheek with practiced precision. How do you know all this? Sophia keeps me updated on all the family drama, plus I'm observant. She glanced at him. Speaking of which, you haven't touched your champagne. Zane looked down at the untouched glass in his hand. Not much of a champagne drinker. Prefer something stronger? Actually, I'd prefer coffee. I've been up since 4. Vivian's eyes lit up. There's a great little cafe just down the street. Makes an excellent espresso. Zane hesitated. The idea of escaping the party was tempting, especially with someone who seemed refreshingly genuine, but he had obligations. I should at least wish Marcus happy birthday before I disappear. Of course, I need to do the same. She glanced around the room. Meet by the service door in 15 minutes. It was impulsive, completely unlike him, but Zane found himself nodding. 15 minutes. They separated, weaving through the crowd to find Marcus. Zane spotted him surrounded by a group of admirers, Cassandra among them, her hand resting possessively on his arm. Marcus's face lit up when he saw Zane approaching. There you are. I thought I'd lost you to the crowd. Marcus extracted himself from the group and pulled Zane aside. So, having fun yet? It's quite an event, Zane said diplomatically. I just wanted to wish you a happy birthday before I head out. I've got an early meeting tomorrow. Marcus's face fell slightly. You're leaving already? The party's just getting started. I know, and I'm sorry, but you know how it is. Zane clasped his friend's shoulder. Rain check for a proper celebration, just the two of us? After a moment, Marcus nodded. Fine, but I'm holding you to that. Dinner at Emilio's, your treat. Deal. Zane pulled a small box from his pocket. Happy birthday, Marcus. Marcus opened it to find a vintage watch, one they'd seen in a shop window during their backpacking trip through Europe after graduation. He'd admired it, but couldn't afford it at the time. His eyes widened. You remembered? Of course I remembered. You talked about that watch for months afterward. Marcus pulled him into a quick embrace. This is why you're my best friend, even when you're being an antisocial workaholic. Zane laughed. Enjoy your night, and good luck with Cassandra. She seems determined. Don't remind me, Marcus grimaced. Get out while you can. With a final farewell, Zane made his way toward the service door, his pulse quickening slightly as he approached. Part of him didn't expect Vivian to be there, assuming their coffee plans were just party small talk. But as he rounded the corner, he saw her waiting, a small clutch bag in hand, looking decidedly out of place near the bustling kitchen staff. Mission accomplished? She asked as he approached. Birthday wishes delivered, friendship intact, you? Same, though I had to promise Sophia a full report on who Marcus talked to all night. They slipped through the service door and down a back hallway, emerging onto a side street away from the main entrance where valets waited with luxury cars. The night air was cool and refreshing after the stuffiness of the ballroom. The cafe is this way, Vivian said, nodding to the left. About 2 blocks. They walked in comfortable silence for a moment, the sounds of the city creating a backdrop to their impromptu escape. Zane found himself studying her profile in the glow of the streetlights. There was something compelling about her, a quiet confidence that didn't demand attention. So, Zane Zimmerman, she said eventually. What do you do when you're not being dragged to parties by old college friends? He hesitated. This was usually the moment when conversations changed, when people realized who he was and what he was worth. I run a company, tech industry. Ah, another Silicon Valley type, she said with a smile that held no judgment. Let me guess, apps, software, something with AI, since that's all anyone seems to talk about these days? AI security systems, actually. He waited for the follow-up questions, the subtle probing for details about his company's valuation, but they didn't come. Interesting. So you're the one keeping the robots from taking over the world? Her tone was light, teasing, something like that. Though sometimes I think the robots might do a better job of running things. He gestured at a small storefront with warm golden light spilling onto the sidewalk. Is this the place? Yes, this is it. Café Lumière. Best coffee in the city, and hardly anyone knows about it. The cafe was small and cozy, with mismatched furniture and bookshelves lining the walls. A few patrons sat reading or working on laptops, and soft jazz played in the background. It felt worlds away from the glittering ballroom they'd just left. They ordered espresso for Zane, a cappuccino for Vivian, and found a small table by the window. So, architecture, Zane said as they settled in. What kind of projects do you work on? Vivian's face lit up with genuine enthusiasm. Mostly residential and small commercial spaces. I specialize in sustainable design, finding ways to make buildings more energy efficient without sacrificing aesthetics. She paused. Sorry, I can get carried away talking about this. No, it's interesting. I've always admired people who can create something tangible. Zane took a sip of his espresso. My work is all digital. Sometimes I miss building things you can actually touch. Is that how you started? Building things? In a way, I was always taking apart electronics as a kid, trying to figure out how they worked, then putting them back together, usually with mixed results. My parents weren't thrilled when I disassembled our new VCR. Vivian laughed. I can imagine. I was similar with buildings, always redesigning my dollhouse, then graduating to sketching plans for my dream home. I drove my parents crazy rearranging furniture to improve the flow of our living room. And now you do it professionally. I try. It's not always easy in a field dominated by established firms, but I love what I do. She stirred her cappuccino. What about you? Do you love what you do? The question caught Zane off guard. Most people asked about his success, his strategy, his investments, not whether he actually enjoyed his work. I used to, without question, lately. He trailed off, surprised by his own honesty. Lately, I've been wondering if I've lost sight of why I started in the first place. Which was to solve problems, to create something useful. He leaned back in his chair. Now it's more about growth projections and quarterly reports than innovation. Vivian nodded. The price of success, I suppose. Does it ever slow down? Not if you want to stay ahead. In tech, the moment you stop moving forward, someone else rushes in to take your place. He looked at her curiously. What about you? What's your measure of success in architecture? Seeing someone truly love the space I've created for them. When a client walks into their new home or office and you can see they immediately feel connected to it, that's success to me. She smiled. Though paying my rent on time is also a nice bonus. They fell into easy conversation, moving from career aspirations to travel stories, books they'd read, and films they'd seen. Zane couldn't remember the last time he'd had such an engaging conversation with someone he'd just met, especially someone who seemed completely uninterested in his status or wealth. So, Vivian said after they'd ordered a second round of coffee, no significant other wondering where you are tonight? Zane shook his head. No, my last relationship ended about a year ago. We wanted different things. Let me guess, you wanted your time. You wanted to build your empire. Something like that. Though, to be fair, she was also building her own empire. Two ambitious people with conflicting schedules doesn't make for a stable relationship. He looked at her questioningly. What about you? Single. My last relationship ended 6 months ago. He was an investment banker who thought my career was a cute hobby I'd eventually give up when we got married. She rolled her eyes. Needless to say, that didn't go over well. His loss, Zane said, surprised by the surge of irritation he felt toward this unknown man who had underestimated her. Vivian smiled, a hint of color touching her cheeks. Thank you. Though, in retrospect, I should have seen the warning signs earlier. He kept referring to my work as my little projects. Definitely a red flag. What about you? Any warning signs you missed? Zane considered the question. I think I knew from the beginning that it wouldn't last. Elise and I were compatible on paper, similar backgrounds, similar ambitions, but there was always something missing. We were more like business partners then. Lovers? Vivian supplied when he hesitated. I was going to say companions, but yes, that too. He glanced at his watch, surprised to see that almost 2 hours had passed. It's getting late. I should probably head home. Of course. Was there a hint of disappointment in her voice, or was he imagining it? I should too. Early client meeting tomorrow. They split the bill despite Zane's attempt to pay for both of them. I invited you, Vivian insisted, and stepped back onto the street. The night had grown cooler, and Vivian wrapped her arms around herself. Do you need a ride home? Zane asked. I can call my driver. Vivian raised an eyebrow. Your driver? Just how successful is this tech company of yours? Zane felt a moment of discomfort. Successful enough to afford a car service, it's more practical than driving myself in the city. She studied him for a moment, and he had the distinct impression she was seeing more than he intended to reveal. Thank you, but I'm fine. I'm only a few blocks away, and I enjoy walking at night. At least let me walk you home. It's late. After a brief hesitation, she nodded. Okay. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, the city quieter now as midnight approached. Street lamps cast pools of light on the sidewalk, and the occasional car passed by. So, Vivian said eventually, are you going to tell me the name of your company? Or should I keep pretending I don't recognize one of the most successful tech entrepreneurs in the country? Zane stopped walking. You knew who I was? She looked at him with a mixture of amusement and sympathy. Zimmertech isn't exactly obscure, Zane. Your face was on the cover of Business Weekly last month. And you didn't say anything. Would it have made our conversation better if I had? She continued walking, and after a moment, he fell into step beside her. Besides, you seem to be enjoying the anonymity. I was, he admitted. It's rare to meet someone who doesn't immediately change how they act when they find out what I do. If it makes you feel better, I didn't recognize you right away. It wasn't until you mentioned AI security that it clicked. They turned onto a tree-lined street with brownstone buildings. Vivian stopped in front of one with a bright blue door. This is me, she said, turning to face him. Thank you for the coffee and conversation. It was refreshing. Zane found himself reluctant to end the evening. Would you like to do it again sometime? Maybe dinner? The question hung between them in the cool night air. Vivian looked at him, her expression thoughtful. I'd like that, she said finally. But I should warn you I'm not impressed by expensive restaurants or VIP treatment. I'd rather go somewhere with good food and no photographers lurking outside. Zane smiled, feeling oddly relieved. I know just the place. How's Thursday? Thursday works. She pulled out her phone and they exchanged numbers. Good night, Zane Zimmerman. Good night, Vivian Bellamy. He waited until she was safely inside before turning to walk back toward the main avenue where he could call his driver. The night had taken an unexpected turn, and for the first time in months, he felt something he had almost forgotten. Anticipation. The next morning, Zane woke earlier than usual, a strange energy coursing through him. The Carlton merger was entering its final phase, demanding his complete attention. Yet his thoughts kept drifting to hazel eyes and a genuine laugh. He shook his head, trying to focus as he prepared for the day. His apartment occupied the top 2 floors of a sleek building overlooking Central Park. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the city waking up, the early morning light painting the skyline in soft gold. It was a stunning space, meticulously designed to project success and sophistication. Sometimes, though, it felt more like a hotel than a home. As he made coffee, his phone chimed with a message. His pulse quickened slightly, but it was just Marcus. "Thanks for showing up last night. The watch is perfect. Sorry you had to leave early." "Lunch next week?" Zane replied with a quick affirmative, then hesitated, thumbs hovering over the keyboard. Should he mention Vivian? No, not yet. Whatever this was, if it was anything at all, he wanted to keep it private for now, away from the well-meaning but intrusive interest of friends. The day passed in a blur of meetings and conference calls. By late afternoon, Zane was sequestered in his office with his CFO and legal team, finalizing the terms of the Carlton acquisition. The numbers were good, the strategy sound. This merger would expand Zimmertech's reach into government contracts, a sector they'd been targeting for years. With Carlton's federal certifications, we'll be positioned to bid on the Department of Defense contracts next quarter, his CFO Alan was saying. Their cybersecurity division complements our AI systems perfectly. Zane nodded, reviewing the financial projections on his tablet. And their team? Are they on board? For the most part. There's some concern about relocating to our headquarters, but nothing we can't work through. The discussion continued, diving deep into integration timelines and personnel decisions. Zane was fully engaged, asking pointed questions and challenging assumptions, but a part of his mind kept circling back to the woman he'd met the night before. It was disconcerting. He prided himself on his focus, his ability to compartmentalize. Yet here he was, thinking about a near stranger in the middle of one of the most important business deals of his career. "Zane," Alan's voice broke through his momentary distraction. "Do you want to review the press release draft?" "Yes, let's do that." Zane straightened in his chair, forcing his attention back to the matter at hand. "I want to make sure we're emphasizing the right message." The meeting stretched into early evening. By the time everyone filed out, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across his office. Zane leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. The merger was on track, but there were still countless details to iron out before the announcement next week. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. He opened it to find a photo of an intricate sandcastle, followed by a message. "Spotted this on my lunch break. Reminded me that some of the most impressive structures are temporary. Looking forward to Thursday. V." A smile spread across his face. He saved the number under her name and typed a response. "Beautiful. Makes me think about what we build and why. Still on for 7 p.m.? Her reply came almost immediately. "Absolutely. Where should I meet you?" He hesitated. The restaurant he had in mind was in a quiet neighborhood, known for excellent food but not for celebrity sightings or Michelin stars. It was one of the few places he could eat without being recognized or interrupted. "There's a small Italian place in the West Village. I'll send the address. Unless you have a preference?" "Italian sounds perfect. I trust your judgment." Something about those 4 words, "I trust your judgment," felt significant, though he couldn't articulate why. Perhaps because trust was so rare in his world, where motives were constantly questioned and relationships often transactional. He sent her the restaurant details, then sat back, aware of the lingering smile on his face. This feeling, this quiet anticipation, was unfamiliar territory. When was the last time he'd looked forward to something that wasn't related to business? The thought was both exhilarating and unsettling. Thursday arrived with unseasonable warmth, the kind of early spring day that made New Yorkers shed their winter coats and flock to outdoor cafes. Zane spent the morning at Zimmertech headquarters, located in a renovated warehouse in Brooklyn that housed over 300 employees. The space reflected the company's ethos, innovative yet practical, with open work areas, glass-walled meeting rooms, and collaborative spaces designed to encourage interaction. As CEO, Zane had a corner office with views of the Manhattan skyline, but he rarely used it, preferring to move around the building, checking in with different teams and staying connected to the actual work being done. Today, however, he was finding it difficult to engage. "You seem distracted," observed Nina, his chief technology officer, as they reviewed progress on their latest security algorithm. "Everything okay with the Carlton deal?" "The deal's fine," Zane assured her. "Just a lot on my mind." Nina, who had been with him since the company's early days, knew him well enough not to press further. Instead, she guided him through the technical specifications of their newest project, a predictive security system that could identify potential breaches before they occurred. By late afternoon, Zane excused himself to head home and change before dinner. As his driver navigated through the city traffic, he found himself unusually nervous about the evening ahead. This wasn't a business dinner with clear objectives, nor was it a casual meetup with friends. He hesitated to even think the word a date, something he hadn't experienced in its genuine form for longer than he cared to admit. Most of his recent relationships had been arrangements of convenience, women who understood his schedule and expected little beyond his occasional company and the perks of dating a successful man. The thought made him uncomfortable now, though he'd never considered it problematic before. Had he become exactly the kind of person he would have once disdained someone who valued efficiency over genuine connection? His apartment felt emptier than usual as he showered and changed. He opted for casual attire, dark jeans, a light blue button-down shirt, and a navy blazer. Nothing that screamed wealthy tech CEO. He wanted tonight to be about him and Vivian, not about his status or her reaction to it. The restaurant, Trattoria Luciana, was tucked away on a quiet street, its modest exterior belying the excellent food served within. Zane had discovered it years ago, before his company went public, and had maintained a quiet relationship with the owner, who valued his privacy and treated him like any other regular customer. He arrived early, securing a table in the back corner away from the windows. The space was warm and inviting, with exposed brick walls, soft lighting from iron chandeliers, and tables covered with crisp white cloths. The aroma of garlic and fresh herbs filled the air. Marco, the owner, greeted him with a firm handshake. "Zane, good to see you. It's been too long." "Business keeps me busy, Marco, but I couldn't stay away from your osso buco forever." Marco grinned. "Special occasion tonight?" He gestured to the single red rose in a slim vase at the center of the table. "Just dinner with a friend," Zane said, though the words felt inadequate. Marco raised an eyebrow, but didn't comment further. "The usual wine? Please." As 7 o'clock approached, Zane found himself checking his watch with increasing frequency. What if she changed her mind? What if she'd only agreed to dinner to be polite? What if the door opened and Vivian walked in, momentarily pausing to scan the restaurant? She wore a simple emerald green dress that complemented her coloring, her hair loose around her shoulders. When she spotted him, her face lit up with a smile that dispelled his doubts. Zane stood as she approached, suddenly aware of the quickening of his pulse. "You found it." "I did. Though I've walked past this place a dozen times and never noticed it." She glanced around appreciatively. "It's lovely. The food's even better than the ambiance," he assured her, pulling out her chair. Once they were seated, Marco appeared with a bottle of Barolo, pouring for them with practiced grace before leaving them to peruse the menu. "So," Vivian said, lifting her wine glass, "how was your week?" "Busy," Zane admitted. "We're finalizing a major acquisition that's been in the works for months, but good." "Yours?" "Challenging. I'm working on a renovation for a historic building that's fighting me at every turn. The original architect apparently believed in surprise support beams and hidden pipes." Zane laughed. "Sounds like legacy code full of unexpected traps and mysterious workarounds." "Exactly. You have to figure out what the original creator was thinking, which is never as straightforward as you'd hope. They fell into easy conversation as they ordered and enjoyed their meal. Zane found himself sharing stories about the early days of his company, the sleepless nights coding in his tiny apartment, the exhilaration of their first major client, the terror of almost going bankrupt before securing their second round of funding. "It sounds like you were happier then," Vivian observed, twirling pasta around her fork, "even with all the uncertainty." The comment caught him off guard. "What makes you say that?" "The way you talk about it. Your whole demeanor changes. You become more animated, more, I don't know, present. When you talk about your current work, it's different, more measured." Zane considered her words. "I suppose you're right. There was something pure about those early days. The focus was on solving problems, creating something new. Now it's more about managing growth, meeting shareholder expectations." He sighed. "Don't get me wrong, I'm proud of what we've built. It's just different." "Do you miss it? The hands-on work?" "Sometimes. I still try to stay involved in the development side, but realistically, my role now is more strategic." He took a sip of wine. "What about you? Would you want your firm to grow into something larger, or do you prefer keeping it small and personal?" Vivian's expression grew thoughtful. "I've been thinking about that a lot lately. I've been offered a partnership at a larger firm, which would mean more resources, bigger projects, but less creative control." "And you're hesitating?" "I am. The rational part of me says it's a great opportunity. The part of me that became an architect because I love designing spaces that make people feel something, that part isn't so sure." "It's a difficult balance," Zane acknowledged. "Growth brings opportunities, but it also changes the nature of what you do." "Exactly," she smiled. "Listen to us having existential career crises over pasta." Zane laughed. Better than having them alone. Their eyes met across the table, and something shifted in the air between them. A recognition, perhaps, of finding someone who understood the unique challenges they each faced, despite their different fields. The evening continued with dessert, a shared tiramisu that Marco insisted they try, and more conversation that flowed effortlessly from work to childhood memories to favorite books. Zane couldn't remember the last time he'd talked so openly with someone or listened so attentively. When the check came, Vivian reached for her purse, but Zane shook his head. "Please, let me. You paid for coffee last time." "Coffee's a bit different from a full dinner with excellent wine," she pointed out. "Consider it a thank you for rescuing me from that party." After a moment's hesitation, she nodded. "All right, but next time is on me." Next time. The words sent a current of pleasure through him. They stepped out into the night, the air still holding the day's warmth. "Can I walk you home?" Zane offered. "I'd like that." They strolled through the village streets, their pace unhurried. Vivian's hand brushed against his, and after a moment's hesitation, Zane took it in his, her fingers intertwined with his, warm and sure. "I have a confession," she said as they turned onto a quieter block. "I Googled you after our coffee date." Zane tensed slightly. "Find anything interesting?" "Nothing too scandalous. Forbes profile, a few interviews, that charity gala where you donated $2 million to education initiatives." She squeezed his hand. "I was impressed by the latter, by the way." "It's important work," he said, slightly uncomfortable with the praise. "Education changed my life. I grew up in a small town in Pennsylvania. If not for a teacher who recognized my aptitude for computers and fought to get me a scholarship, I might never have made it to college." "You don't talk about your background in interviews," she observed. "No, I don't. It's private." "Thank you for sharing it with me." They had reached her building with its distinctive blue door. Vivian turned to face him, still holding his hand. "I had a wonderful time tonight, Zane." "So did I." He hesitated, suddenly uncertain. It had been a long time since he'd been in this position, standing at a woman's door at the end of a date, trying to gauge if a goodnight kiss would be welcomed or premature. Vivian solved his dilemma by rising slightly on her toes and pressing her lips softly against his. It was a brief kiss, gentle and undemanding, but it sent warmth spreading through his chest. "Good night," she whispered, stepping back. "Good night, Vivian." He watched as she unlocked her door and slipped inside, turning to give him a final smile before closing it. Zane stood there for a moment longer, aware of a feeling he hadn't experienced in years, happiness, simple and uncomplicated. The sensation stayed with him as he walked back to the avenue to hail a cab, as he rode the elevator up to his apartment, as he stood looking out at the city lights. For the first time in longer than he could remember, his thoughts weren't on work, on strategies and targets and competition. They were on a woman with intelligent eyes and a smile that made him forget momentarily that he was Zane Zimmerman, CEO of Zimmertech, and allowed him to just be Zane, a man enjoying the beginning of something new. The days that followed took on a different rhythm. Zane still worked long hours. The Carlton merger demanded nothing less, but his evenings now included phone calls with Vivian, exchanges of texts throughout the day, and a second date that weekend. A walk through the Metropolitan Museum of Art, where Vivian's knowledge of architectural history turned what might have been a casual stroll into a fascinating tour. "See how the light interacts with the space?" she said, gesturing to the grand atrium. The architect understood that buildings are experienced, not just observed. It's about how a space makes you feel when you're in it. Zane watched her more than the architecture, captivated by her passion and the animated way she spoke with her hands. "How does this space make you feel?" She considered the question seriously. "Inspired, humbled, connected to something larger than myself." She looked at him curiously. "What about you?" "Right now, happy." A blush touched her cheeks and she looked away, but he caught the smile that curved her lips. They spent hours wandering through the museum, stopping for lunch at the cafe where they discussed everything from ancient Egyptian building techniques to the ethics of AI development. Zane found himself opening up about the challenges facing his industry, the philosophical questions that kept him awake at night. "We're creating systems with the power to make decisions that affect people's lives," he explained. "The security protocols we develop determine who gets flagged as a potential threat, who gets access to what information. That's an enormous responsibility." "How do you ensure the technology doesn't perpetuate existing biases?" Vivian asked. It was a sophisticated question, one that demonstrated she'd given the issue real thought. "That's the million-dollar question," Zane admitted. "We have diverse teams working on our algorithms, constant testing against different demographic scenarios, external audits, but it's an ongoing battle." "It sounds like you take it seriously." "I have to. Technology isn't neutral. It reflects the values and assumptions of its creators." As they left the museum late in the afternoon, Vivian slipped her hand into his. "Thank you for today. Most of my date's eyes glaze over when I start talking about architectural theory." "Their loss," Zane said, squeezing her hand. "I find your perspective fascinating." The truth was, he found everything about her fascinating. Her mind worked differently than his, approaching problems from angles he wouldn't have considered. She challenged him, made him think, and most importantly, made him feel present in a way he hadn't in years. The third date was Vivian's idea, a food truck festival in Brooklyn, where they sampled everything from Korean tacos to artisanal ice cream. Zane, accustomed to business dinners at exclusive restaurants, found himself enjoying the casual atmosphere, the freedom to wander from vendor to vendor, the simple pleasure of sitting on a bench by the water, watching the sunset over the Manhattan skyline. "You have a little something." Vivian reached up to wipe a spot of sauce from the corner of his mouth, her touch lingering. Zane caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "Thank you for bringing me here. I wouldn't have experienced this otherwise." "You don't get out much, do you?" There was no judgment in her voice, only gentle observation. Not like this. My social life tends to revolve around industry events, fundraisers, business dinners. They all start to feel the same after a while. All work and no play makes Zane a dull boy, she teased. Something like that. He looked out at the water, considering his next words carefully. My work became my identity somewhere along the way. It wasn't a conscious decision, it just happened. Success demanded more time, more focus, and gradually everything else fell away. And now? He turned to her, studying the way the setting sun illuminated her profile. Now I'm starting to remember there's more to life. She met his gaze, her expression softening. I'm glad. The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. Then Vivian stood, pulling him to his feet. Come on, there's a dessert truck I want to try before we leave. As they walked hand in hand through the crowd, Zane felt a lightness he hadn't experienced in years. Whatever was happening between them, it felt important, significant in a way that had nothing to do with business metrics or strategic value. It felt real. The following week brought new challenges. The Carlton merger announcement was scheduled for Monday, triggering a flurry of last-minute preparations. Zane spent Sunday at the office with his executive team, reviewing press statements, finalizing details, and preparing for the inevitable market reaction. The stock will likely surge initially, predicted Allen, reviewing the financial models. We should be prepared for increased scrutiny from regulators, though. This puts us in a dominant position in the sector. Zane nodded, scanning the report before him. Make sure legal is ready for any inquiries. I want all our documentation impeccable. The meeting stretched into the evening. When they finally wrapped up, Zane checked his phone to find a message from Vivian sent hours earlier. Good luck tomorrow. I know it's a big day for you. The simple acknowledgement of what he was facing warmed him. He called her as his driver took him home through the darkened city streets. Hey, she answered, her voice soft. I wasn't sure if you'd call tonight. Just got out of the office. Sorry for the radio silence today. No apology needed. I understand big projects. Still, I wanted to hear your voice before tomorrow's chaos begins. He leaned back against the leather seat, closing his eyes. How was your weekend? Productive. I finalized the plans for that renovation I told you about, the one with all the surprise structural elements. I think I've finally made peace with the building's quirks. I'm sure the result will be beautiful. That's the goal. She paused. Are you nervous about tomorrow? Not nervous exactly. It's more anticipatory tension. This merger changes the trajectory of the company. It's what I've been working toward for years. You'll be brilliant, she said with such conviction that he found himself believing it. They talked until his car pulled up to his building. Before hanging up, Zane hesitated, then asked, Would you want to have dinner later this week, after the dust settles? I'd love to. Just let me know when you come up for air. I will. Good night, Vivian. Good night, Zane. Try to get some sleep. But sleep proved elusive. Zane lay awake, his mind racing with last-minute considerations about the merger, interspersed with thoughts of Vivian. The two spheres of his life, professional and personal, seemed to be accelerating simultaneously, creating a strange tension he couldn't quite resolve. Monday arrived with the intensity he'd expected. The merger announcement sent Zimmertech's stocks soaring, and Zane's day became a blur of media interviews, investor calls, and internal communications. By evening, his voice was hoarse from repeating the same carefully crafted statements about synergies and growth prospects. Champagne, Nina offered as they finally gathered in the conference room after the markets closed. The executive team looked exhausted, but jubilant. Definitely. Zane accepted a glass, raising it in a toast. To all of you. This wouldn't have happened without your hard work and dedication. As celebrations continued around him, Zane slipped away to his office to call Vivian. When she answered, the background noise suggested she was in a public place. "Congratulations," she said warmly. "I saw the announcement everywhere today." "Thank you. It's been intense." "I can imagine. Are you celebrating?" "The team is. I stepped away for a moment to call you." "That's sweet, but you should be with them. This is your victory too." "I know. I just wanted to hear your voice." There was a pause. Then Vivian said, "I'm actually out with clients right now. Can I call you later?" "Of course," Zane said, trying to hide his disappointment. "Enjoy your evening." After hanging up, he rejoined his team, making an effort to engage in the celebration. These people had worked tirelessly to make today possible. They deserved his full attention. But a part of him remained distant, already thinking ahead to when he might see Vivian again. It was Thursday, before their schedules aligned. Vivian suggested cooking dinner at her apartment, an idea that appealed to Zane far more than another restaurant meal, no matter how exclusive. Her building was an older walk-up in a neighborhood that had yet to become fully gentrified. The apartment itself was a revelation, a loft-like space with high ceilings, exposed brick, and large windows that filled it with natural light. What it lacked in luxury finishes, it made up for in thoughtful design. Every element seemed carefully chosen, from the mid-century furniture to the artwork on the walls. "You designed this yourself," Zane observed, taking in the space. "I did. It was a mess when I bought it. Dropped ceilings, walls breaking up the space, awful carpet covering these beautiful hardwood floors." She handed him a glass of wine. "It took months of weekends and evenings, but it was worth it." "It's incredible. It feels like you." She smiled, pleased by the comment. "That's the highest compliment you could give me. A home should reflect its inhabitant." Zane thought of his own apartment stylish, impressive, but ultimately impersonal. It had been designed by a professional to project a certain image, not to reflect who he truly was. Dinner was simple but delicious. Homemade pasta with a sauce that had been simmering all day, crusty bread, and a salad with ingredients from the farmer's market. They ate at a small table by the window, the city lights creating a backdrop to their conversation. "So, tell me about the merger reaction," Vivian said as they finished their meal. "Beyond the stock price, which I gather was positive." "Very positive. We're up 20% since the announcement." Zane swirled the wine in his glass. "The integration process begins next week. That's when the real work starts, combining two company cultures, aligning systems, reassuring employees who are worried about their positions." "It sounds challenging." "It is, but necessary for growth." He set down his glass. "Enough about my work. Tell me about your week." Vivian's eyes lit up. "I got the green light on a project I've been pursuing for months, a community center in an underserved neighborhood. It's not a huge budget, but the impact could be significant. Creating a space where people can gather, learn, connect. That's wonderful, Vivian." He reached across the table to take her hand. "I'd love to see your design sometime." "Really? Most people's eyes glaze over when I start talking blueprints." "I'm not most people." "No," she agreed softly. "You're not." After dinner, they moved to her small sofa, the conversation flowing easily from work to books to childhood memories. Vivian curled against him, her head resting on his shoulder as she described growing up in a small town in Vermont, the daughter of a high school English teacher and a carpenter. "My dad taught me to appreciate the craftsmanship in buildings, how materials come together to create something lasting. My mom gave me my love of literature, of stories." She looked up at him. "What about your parents? You've hardly mentioned them." Zane was quiet for a moment. "My father worked in a steel mill. He died when I was 15, workplace accident. My mother raised my sister and me on her own after that, working 2 jobs to keep us afloat. That must have been difficult." "It was. I started working after school to help out, but there was never enough money." He hesitated, then added, "That's part of why I push so hard now. Financial security wasn't something I took for granted growing up. Vivian's hand found his, fingers intertwining. Does your mother know what you've accomplished? She does. I bought her a house in Florida 5 years ago. She retired early, spends her time gardening and volunteering at a literacy program. He smiled at the thought. She's proud, but she also regularly reminds me that money isn't everything. Wise woman. She is. You'd like her. The words hung in the air, carrying implications neither was quite ready to address. Meeting family was a step beyond what they had acknowledged so far. Vivian broke the moment by sitting up, her expression suddenly playful. Enough serious talk. Tell me something frivolous about yourself, something no one would guess about the serious CEO of Zimmertech. Zane thought for a moment. I have an embarrassingly extensive knowledge of 80s action movies. I went through a phase in college where I watched them obsessively instead of studying. Really? Vivian laughed. Like what? Die Hard, Predator, Terminator, the classics. I can quote them line by line. Prove it. Zane cleared his throat dramatically. I'll be back, he intoned in his best Schwarzenegger impression. Vivian burst into laughter, the sound filling the apartment. That was terrible. Hey, I never claimed to be an actor. Clearly, she was still laughing, her eyes bright with amusement. Any other hidden talents I should know about? I make a mean omelet, and I used to play guitar, though I haven't picked one up in years. Why not? Zane shrugged. No time, I guess. Like a lot of things in my life, it got set aside when work took over. Vivian studied him thoughtfully. What would you do if you weren't running Zimmertech? If you could do anything without worrying about practicality or expectations? It was a question no one had asked him in years, perhaps ever. I'm not sure, he admitted. I've been focused on this path for so long. Think about it, she encouraged. What made you happy as a kid before you started worrying about careers and success? Zane cast his mind back. Past the years of building his company, past college and the pressure to succeed, to a time when possibilities seemed endless. I loved building things, not just computers, but physical things, tree houses, model planes, and I loved being outdoors, away from the industrial town where we lived, camping, hiking. He smiled at the memory. My dad used to take us fishing before he died. Those are some of my happiest memories. When was the last time you went fishing? God, I can't remember. College, maybe? So the billionaire tech genius secretly wishes he could be camping by a lake. Zane laughed. Maybe. What about you? What would you do if not architecture? I'd restore old houses, find neglected buildings with good bones and bring them back to life. She gestured around her apartment. Like this, but on a larger scale. There's something deeply satisfying about preserving history while making it functional for modern life. That's not so different from what you do now. No, but it would be more hands-on, less about client presentations and building codes. Just me, my tools, and a house with stories to tell. As she spoke, Zane could picture it clearly. Vivian in overalls, hair tied back, restoring an old Victorian to its former glory. The image suited her somehow, this woman who saw beauty in structure and possibility in neglect. The evening deepened, and Zane found himself reluctant to leave. When Vivian kissed him, it was different from their previous goodnight kisses, deeper, more insistent. He responded in kind, drawing her closer, one hand tangling in her hair. Stay, she whispered against his lips. If you want to. He pulled back slightly to look at her, wanting to be sure. I want to, he said quietly, but only if you're certain. Her answer was to kiss him again, rising from the sofa and leading him toward her bedroom. The room was simple but warm, with a large bed covered in soft linens, and more of the thoughtfully chosen art that characterized her apartment. They took their time, learning each other's bodies with a mixture of eagerness and patience. Zane discovered the sensitive spot at the base of her neck that made her gasp, the way she arched into his touch when he traced the curve of her spine. Vivian explored him with equal thoroughness, her fingers mapping the contours of his chest, her lips following the path they blazed. When they finally came together, it was with a sense of rightness that caught Zane by surprise. This wasn't just physical attraction or convenient companionship. It was something deeper, a connection that transcended the physical even as it was expressed through touch. Afterward, they lay tangled together, Vivian's head resting on his chest, his arm curved protectively around her. The city sounds drifted in through the partially open window. Distant traffic, occasional voices, the ambient hum that never quite disappeared in New York. "What are you thinking?" Vivian asked softly, her fingers tracing patterns on his skin. "That I can't remember the last time I felt this content," he answered honestly. She propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "Is that a good thing?" "It's a very good thing." He brushed a strand of hair from her face, also slightly terrifying. Terrifying. I'm used to being in control, knowing what comes next. This us I don't have a roadmap for. Vivian's expression softened. Maybe that's okay. Not everything needs a strategic plan. Says the architect who designs every detail before breaking ground. She laughed. Fair point, but there's a difference between professional projects and personal life. Sometimes you have to leave room for unexpected developments. Like meeting someone at a party you didn't want to attend? Exactly like that. She settled back against him. I'm glad you were there, even if you were planning your escape the whole time. Best failed escape of my life, Zane murmured, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. They fell asleep that way, wrapped in each other's arms, the concerns of their separate lives temporarily suspended in the quiet intimacy of the night. Morning came with soft light filtering through curtains neither had thought to close. Zane woke first, momentarily disoriented by unfamiliar surroundings, before the events of the previous night came back to him. Vivian slept beside him, her face peaceful, one hand curled under her cheek. He allowed himself a moment to simply look at her, taking in the details he hadn't fully appreciated before, the scatter of freckles across her nose, the slight curve of her lips even in sleep, the way her hair spread across the pillow in waves of chestnut brown. Something tightened in his chest, a feeling both wonderful and frightening in its intensity. Carefully, so as not to wake her, he slipped out of bed and found his phone in the pocket of his discarded pants. Several missed calls and a dozen emails demanded his attention. The Carlton integration was proceeding faster than anticipated, and decisions needed to be made. With a sigh, he stepped into the living room to return the most urgent calls, keeping his voice low. He was just finishing a conversation with his COO when Vivian appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a robe, her hair tousled from sleep. "Sorry," he said, ending the call. "I didn't want to wake you." "It's okay. I heard you talking business." She moved to the kitchen area and began preparing coffee. "Sounds like you're needed at the office." "Unfortunately, yes." He joined her, leaning against the counter. "The Carlton team is flying in this afternoon for the first integration meeting." "I understand." She handed him a mug of coffee. "Important day." "It is." He took a sip, watching her over the rim of the mug. "But I wish I could stay." Vivian smiled, a hint of mischief in her eyes. "Well, you do need a shower before your big meeting." An hour later, freshly showered and considerably more relaxed despite the looming day, Zane reluctantly prepared to leave. At the door, Vivian straightened his tie, a domestic gesture that felt surprisingly natural. "Dinner tomorrow?" he suggested. "I'll cook this time." "You cook?" She looked skeptical. "I told you I make a mean omelet, and I can handle pasta without burning down the kitchen." "Impressive credentials. I accept." He kissed her goodbye, a lingering kiss that threatened to make him even later than he already was. "I'll call you later." The day passed in a whirlwind of meetings, presentations, and strategic discussions. The Carlton executives were understandably nervous about their company's future, and Zane spent hours reassuring them about his vision for the combined entity. By evening, progress had been made, but much remained to be done. As he finally left the office, Zane realized he hadn't eaten since a hurried sandwich at his desk hours earlier. On impulse, he directed his driver to stop at a small market where he picked up ingredients for the dinner he'd promised Vivian. Cooking wasn't something he did often, but he enjoyed it when he had the time, the precise measurements, the transformation of separate elements into something cohesive, the tangible results of his efforts. His apartment felt different as he prepared for Vivian's visit the next evening. He moved through the sleek minimalist space with new eyes, seeing it as she might, impressive but impersonal, designed to make a statement rather than provide comfort. He'd never given it much thought before. The apartment was primarily a place to sleep and occasionally entertain business associates. Now, comparing it to Vivian's warm, personalized home, he found it wanting. Still, he did what he could, setting the dining table with the fine china he rarely used, lighting candles, selecting music that would provide a pleasant background without dominating the space. The pasta dish he prepared was simple but elegant, something he'd learned from an Italian chef during a business trip to Rome years earlier. When Vivian arrived, her appreciation seemed genuine as she took in his efforts. "This is lovely," she said, accepting the glass of wine he offered. "I'm impressed." "Don't be too impressed until you've tasted the food," he warned with a smile. "It's been a while since I've cooked for anyone." But dinner was a success. The pasta cooked perfectly, the conversation flowing as easily as it had from the beginning. Vivian told him about a difficult client meeting that day, where she'd had to defend her design choices to a committee more concerned with cost than quality. "I understand budget constraints," she said, gesturing with her fork, "but some compromises fundamentally change the integrity of the design. It's not just about aesthetics, it's about functionality, sustainability, how people will interact with the space for years to come." "Did you convince them?" "Partially. They agreed to maintain the central atrium, which was non-negotiable for me. We'll make adjustments elsewhere." She looked around his apartment. "Speaking of design, who did this space? It's very sterile," Zane suggested when she hesitated. She laughed. "I was going to say curated, but yes, it lacks a certain warmth. I hired a designer when I bought it, told her to make it look like a successful CEO should live here." He shrugged. "I didn't give it much thought beyond that." "Does it feel like home to you?" The question gave him pause. "I'm not sure it ever has," he admitted. "It's where I live, but not where you belong," Vivian finished softly. Their eyes met across the table, and Zane felt that now familiar tightening in his chest. How had this woman he'd known for such a short time managed to see through him so completely? "Maybe I'm still figuring out where that is," he said finally. After dinner, they moved to the living room with their wine. Zane hesitated, then said, "There's something I want to show you." He led her to a door off the main living area that opened into a room he rarely entered, his home office. Unlike the rest of the apartment, this space reflected his personal tastes rather than a designer's vision. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with technical manuals, biographies, and classic science fiction. A vintage desk dominated the center of the room, its surface cluttered with papers and electronic components. One corner held fishing gear, unused for years but kept ready for an opportunity that never seemed to arise. "This is more like it," Vivian said, running her fingers along the spines of his books. "This feels like you." "It's the one room I didn't let the designer touch." He watched as she explored the space, taking in the details that revealed more about him than he typically allowed people to see. "I come in here when I need to think, to remember why I started all this in the first place." Vivian picked up a framed photo from the desk, a much younger Zane standing beside a rudimentary computer setup, grinning with the unrestrained pride of youth. "When was this taken?" "College dorm room, freshman year. That computer behind me was my first real attempt at building something from scratch. It crashed constantly and overheated if you ran it for more than an hour, but I was absurdly proud of it." She smiled at the image. You look happy. I was. Everything was possibility then. Vivian set the photo down carefully and turned to him. And now? Now is different, complicated, but in some ways, better. He stepped closer to her. I've built something lasting, made an impact. That matters to me. Of course it does. It should. She reached up to touch his face. But so should this time to enjoy what you've created, to live fully outside of work. He turned his head to press a kiss to her palm. I'm starting to remember that. Later, as they lay in his bed, the city lights creating patterns on the ceiling through the sheer curtains, Zane found himself telling Vivian about his earliest days building the company. The setbacks, the near failures, the moments when he'd almost given up, stories he rarely shared, viewing vulnerability as a luxury he couldn't afford in his position. There was a night, about 6 months in, when our server crashed and we lost a crucial client presentation, he recalled. I stayed up rebuilding it from scratch, knowing if we failed to deliver, we'd lose our biggest account. By morning, I was so exhausted I could barely see straight, but it was done. I remember thinking, this is it. If this doesn't work, we're finished. But it did work, Vivian prompted, her head resting on his chest. It did. Better than the original, actually. That client is still with us today, one of our strongest partnerships. He stroked her hair absently. There were dozens of moments like that in the early days, where everything hinged on one decision, one presentation, one product release. It must have been terrifying. It was, but also exhilarating. Every day mattered in a way that's hard to replicate now that the company is established. Vivian propped herself up to look at him. Do you ever think about stepping back? Not retiring, but maybe finding a different role that would let you focus on the parts you love most? The question caught him by surprise. Honestly, no. The company is me. I'm the company. That's how it's always been. But it doesn't have to be, does it? You've built a strong executive team, established systems that work. Maybe there's a way for Zimmertech to thrive while giving you more space for other aspects of life. Zane considered her words. The idea of stepping back from day-to-day operations wasn't something he'd seriously contemplated before. His identity was so thoroughly entwined with his role as CEO that separating the two seemed almost impossible. And yet, I don't know, he said finally. It's worth thinking about. Vivian smiled, pressing a kiss to his chest before settling back against him. That's all I'm suggesting. Thinking about possibilities. As she drifted to sleep in his arms, Zane remained awake, turning over the conversation in his mind. What would his life look like if he weren't defined primarily by his company? What would he do with time that was truly his own? The questions were both unsettling and oddly freeing. The weeks that followed fell into a pattern that felt both novel and natural. Zane continued to work long hours as the Carlton integration progressed, but he made time for Vivian, their relationship deepening with each shared evening, each conversation, each moment of intimacy. They discovered mutual interests, a love of old films, a shared appreciation for architectural landmarks, a fondness for quiet Sunday mornings with coffee and the newspaper. They also discovered differences. Vivian was spontaneous where Zane planned meticulously. She was optimistic where he tended toward pragmatism. She valued experience over possessions in a way his deprived childhood had made difficult for him to fully embrace. Yet these differences enriched rather than divided them. Vivian's spontaneity led them to unexpected adventures, a midnight showing of Casablanca at an old theater, an impromptu weekend drive to a small coastal town neither had visited before. Zane's attention to detail ensured those adventures were comfortable and stress-free, with reservations made and contingencies considered. One Saturday afternoon, about 6 weeks after they'd met, they were walking through a neighborhood of brownstones when Vivian stopped abruptly in front of a building with a "For Sale" sign in the window. Look at that, she said, pointing to the ornate facade with its original stonework. It's a Frederick Rhinelander house, late 19th century. You don't see many of these intact anymore. Zane studied the building. It was clearly in need of renovation, peeling paint, cracked steps leading to the entrance, but the bones were solid. It's beautiful, he agreed, though it looks like it needs work. That's part of its charm. Vivian's eyes were alight with interest. Imagine what it could be with the right restoration. Those bay windows, the cornices, the potential for a garden in the back. You're seeing it already, aren't you? The finished project. She nodded. I can't help it. It's how my mind works. She sighed. Too bad it's probably well beyond my budget. This neighborhood has been gentrifying for years. Zane made a mental note of the address and the real estate agent listed on the sign. Maybe someday, he said, taking her hand as they continued their walk. Your dream restoration project. Later that week, he made a discreet inquiry about the property. As Vivian had predicted, the price was substantial, reflecting the location and the building's historic value despite its condition. It wasn't a practical purchase for someone in her position, even with her growing architectural practice. For Zane, however, it was well within reach. The thought of buying it for her crossed his mind, but he hesitated. They'd been together for less than 2 months. Such a grand gesture might seem overwhelming, presumptuous even. And Vivian valued her independence. She might see it as an attempt to impose his financial advantage on their relationship. Still, he couldn't shake the image of her face as she'd looked at the building, the way her eyes had lit up with creative possibility. It was the same expression she wore when discussing her designs or describing a particularly elegant architectural solution. It was, he realized, the look of someone engaged in their passion. When was the last time he'd felt that kind of pure enthusiasm for his work? The question lingered as he sat through budget meetings and strategy sessions, as he fielded calls from investors and reviewed quarterly projections. He was proud of what he'd built, satisfied with his achievements, but that spark of joyful creation had dimmed somewhere along the way. You're distracted, Nina observed during a product development review. Everything okay? Yes, sorry. Zane refocused on the presentation before them. The new security protocol looks promising. Have we tested it against the latest ransomware variants? The meeting continued, but Nina's comments stayed with him. He was distracted, his thoughts increasingly divided between his responsibilities as CEO and his evolving relationship with Vivian. For the first time in his career, work wasn't consuming all his mental space. The realization was both liberating and unsettling. That evening, he and Vivian had plans to attend a gallery opening featuring the work of an artist friend of hers. The event was crowded, the small space filled with people examining abstract paintings while sipping wine from plastic cups. It wasn't Zane's usual scene, but he found himself enjoying the animated way Vivian discussed the artwork, her insights making him see details he might otherwise have missed. Eliza captures tension brilliantly, she was saying, gesturing to a large canvas dominated by intersecting lines in bold colors. See how these elements seem to be pulling against each other while simultaneously creating balance? It's like a visual representation of opposing forces finding harmony. Zane studied the painting with new appreciation. I see it now. It's beautiful once you understand what you're looking for. That's true of most things, isn't it? Vivian smiled, slipping her arm through his. Understanding changes perception. As they moved through the gallery, Zane became aware of occasional glances in their direction. He was used to being recognized, but usually in business contexts, not at small art shows in Brooklyn. He tried to ignore it, focusing instead on Vivian and the artwork. Eventually, they stopped before a smaller painting tucked in a corner, a study in blues and grays that suggested a horizon at dawn. It was more representational than the other pieces, yet still abstract enough to leave room for interpretation. This one's my favorite, Vivian said quietly. It feels like possibility. Before Zane could respond, a woman approached them, her gaze moving between Zane and Vivian with undisguised curiosity. "Vivian, darling, I didn't expect to see you here," she said, air kissing Vivian's cheek before turning a calculated smile on Zane. "And with such distinguished company." Vivian's posture stiffened slightly, but her smile remained polite. "Rebecca, lovely to see you. This is Zane Zimmerman." Zane, Rebecca Lloyd, a colleague from my brief stint at Blackwell Design. "A pleasure," Zane said, shaking her hand. Rebecca's eyes widened at the confirmation of his identity. "The pleasure is mine. I've followed your company's growth with interest. The Carlton acquisition was brilliantly executed." "Thank you. Rebecca is one of the top commercial architects in the city," Vivian added. "Her firm designed the new financial center downtown." "Impressive," Zane acknowledged. "We do all right," Rebecca said with false modesty. "Actually, we're expanding our tech sector portfolio. Perhaps we should set up a meeting to discuss Zimmertech's future facility needs?" It was a transparent attempt to use the chance encounter for professional gain, and Zane felt Vivian tense beside him. "My facilities team handles those decisions," he said smoothly, "but they're always open to new proposals." Rebecca handed him a business card from her clutch. "Perfect. I'll reach out to schedule something." She turned back to Vivian with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "So lovely to catch up, darling. We should do lunch sometime." After she walked away, Vivian released a small sigh. "Sorry about that. Rebecca has always been opportunistic." "No need to apologize. I'm used to it." Zane slipped the business card into his pocket without looking at it. "Does it bother you? People approaching because of who I am rather than the fact that I'm with you?" Vivian considered the question. "It's not ideal, but it's part of who you are. I understand that." She looked at him with a hint of vulnerability. "Does it bother you that I'm not part of that world, that my colleagues are struggling artists in small design firms rather than corporate executives?" "God, no." Zane pulled her closer. "It's one of the things I love about you. Your world is real in a way mine often isn't." The word love had slipped out unintentionally, hanging in the air between them. Zane hadn't planned to say it, especially not here, surrounded by strangers in a crowded gallery. But now that it was spoken, he realized it was true. He loved her, her passion, her perspective, her ability to see beyond surfaces to what mattered. Vivian's eyes widened slightly, then softened. "One of the things you love about me?" she repeated quietly. Zane took a breath. "Yes, one of many." She smiled, a slow, radiant smile that made his heart race. "Good to know," she said, rising on her toes to kiss him lightly. "Because I'm finding there are quite a few things I love about you too, Zane Zimmerman." The moment was interrupted by the arrival of the artist herself, a petite woman with bright blue hair who embraced Vivian warmly. As they chatted about the exhibition, Zane found himself watching Vivian, struck by how fully she engaged with her friend, how genuinely she praised the work. There was no artifice to her, no calculation. It was refreshing in a world where most interactions felt layered with ulterior motives. Later that night, as they lay tangled together in Vivian's bed, the word emerged again, this time with deliberate intent. "I love you," Zane murmured against her skin, the declaration feeling both momentous and completely natural. "I didn't expect it, but I do." Vivian's fingers traced the line of his jaw. "I love you too," she whispered back. "It terrifies me a little, how quickly and completely this has happened." "Me too," he pulled her closer, "but I wouldn't change it." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, the declaration creating a new intimacy between them, a shared vulnerability that deepened their connection. The following weeks brought new challenges as their relationship became increasingly public. A photo of them at the gallery opening, appeared in a gossip column under the headline Tech Titan's New Romance, followed by speculation about Vivian's background and what had drawn Zane to the unknown architect. More concerning was the attention that began to follow Vivian in her professional life. Suddenly, clients who had been hesitant about her proposals became eager to work with her. Colleagues who had barely acknowledged her at industry events now sought her out. It was flattering on one level, deeply uncomfortable on another. "I want to be hired for my work, not because people think I can introduce them to you," she confessed to Zane one evening as they prepared dinner in her kitchen. "Yesterday, a potential client asked more questions about you than about my design for his restaurant." Zane paused in chopping vegetables. "I'm sorry. I know how important your professional reputation is to you." "It's not your fault." She stirred the sauce simmering on the stove. "It's just the reality of being with someone in your position. I need to figure out how to navigate it. For what it's worth, anyone who actually sees your work knows you don't need my name to succeed. Your designs speak for themselves." Vivian smiled, though concern still shadowed her eyes. "Thank you for saying that. I mean it." He set down the knife and moved to wrap his arms around her from behind. "You're extraordinarily talented, Vivian. Don't let anyone make you doubt that." She leaned back against him, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "I won't. It's just an adjustment." Despite these complications, their relationship continued to deepen. They established routines: Sunday brunches at a quiet cafe near Vivian's apartment, weeknight dinners at either of their homes, occasional weekends away from the city when Zane could step away from work. They learned each other's habits, preferences, the small details that comprised their separate lives, now increasingly intertwined. Zane found himself looking forward to these moments of shared domesticity more than the high-profile events that had once dominated his social calendar. There was a simple pleasure in cooking together, in discussing their days and falling asleep, and waking up beside someone who understood him beyond his professional identity. 3 months into their relationship, Zane made a decision. The brownstone that had captured Vivian's imagination was still on the market, its price recently reduced due to lack of interest. After careful consideration, he arranged to purchase it, not as a gift for Vivian, but as an investment in their shared future. "I want to show you something," he told her one Saturday morning. "A potential project." "What kind of project?" she asked as they walked through her neighborhood, the autumn air crisp around them. "You'll see." When they turned onto the street with the brownstone, Vivian's steps slowed. "Is this going where I think it is?" Zane nodded, leading her to the building she'd admired weeks earlier. "I bought it," he said simply, "as an investment property, but I was hoping you might be interested in designing the renovation." Vivian stared at him, then at the building, her expression cycling through surprise, suspicion, and cautious excitement. "You bought this building as an investment property, and now you're hiring me as your architect?" "Yes, with complete creative control. Whatever vision you had when you first saw it, I want you to make it reality." He pulled out a set of keys. "Want to see inside?" After a moment's hesitation, Vivian nodded. They entered the brownstone to find a space that had clearly seen better days: peeling wallpaper, worn hardwood floors, outdated fixtures. But beneath the neglect, the building's character shone through in high ceilings, ornate moldings, and generous proportions. "It's even better than I imagined," Vivian murmured, moving from room to room with growing excitement. "Look at these original details, the light from these windows, the flow of the space." Zane watched her, enjoying her enthusiasm. "So you'll take the project?" She turned to face him, her expression growing serious. "I need to be clear about something first. If I do this, it's a professional engagement. I'll charge you my standard fee, document everything properly, and expect to be treated like any other client. This can't be a gift or a favor." "I understand completely." Zane had anticipated this reaction. "I respect your professional boundaries, Vivian. This is a business arrangement. I need an architect for a renovation, and you're the best person for the job. The fact that I love you is separate from that." She studied him for a moment, then smiled. "All right then, Mr. Zimmerman. You've got yourself an architect." "Excellent, Ms. Bellamy. I look forward to seeing what you create." The brownstone project gave them a new dimension to their relationship, a shared endeavor that combined their respective strengths. Vivian threw herself into the design, spending hours researching the building's history, drafting plans that would preserve its character while updating it for modern living. Zane, for his part, discovered he enjoyed being involved in the tangible process of restoration, something so different from the digital world he typically inhabited. "What do you think about opening up this wall to connect the kitchen and dining area?" Vivian asked one evening as they pored over her preliminary drawings spread across her dining table. It would improve the light and flow while maintaining the original footprint. Zane studied the plans. "I like it. Modern functionality with historic character." "Exactly." She made a note on the drawing. "And for the third floor, I'm thinking a master suite with an office space that overlooks the garden." "Sounds perfect." Zane hesitated, then asked the question that had been on his mind. "When you design this space, who do you imagine living here?" Vivian looked up, her expression thoughtful. "Someone who appreciates history but isn't bound by it. Someone who wants a home that balances beauty and practicality." She met his eyes. "Someone a bit like us, I suppose." The implication hung in the air between them. Neither had explicitly discussed living together, though they spent most nights at one or the other's place. The brownstone represented a possibility, a space that could be theirs, designed with both of them in mind. "I'd like that," Zane said quietly. "A space that reflects both of us." Vivian's smile was warm but cautious. "It's a big step." "It is. But one I'm ready for, if you are." She reached across the table to take his hand. "Let's design it first, see how it feels. No pressure, no rush." As autumn deepened into winter, the brownstone project progressed alongside their relationship. Contractors were hired, permits secured, and renovation began in earnest. Vivian was in her element, overseeing the work with a combination of creative vision and practical know-how that impressed even the most experienced craftsmen on the job. Zane, meanwhile, found himself at a crossroads professionally. The Carlton integration was complete, the merged company functioning smoothly under his leadership. Zimmertech's stock was at an all-time high, and industry analysts were speculating about his next move. Expansion into new markets, another acquisition, going public. Yet for the first time in his career, Zane wasn't driven solely by growth and ambition. His conversations with Vivian over the past months had prompted deeper reflection about what he truly wanted, not just for his company, but for his life. The question came to a head during a board meeting in December, when his CFO presented a potential acquisition target, a younger company with promising AI technology but financial struggles. "Their core technology would integrate well with our security systems," Allen explained, "and we could acquire them at a significant discount given their cash flow issues." It was exactly the kind of opportunity Zane would have pursued without hesitation a year earlier. The financial logic was sound, the strategic fit clear. Yet he found himself hesitating. "What about their team?" he asked. "They have some of the best researchers in the field. How would they feel about being absorbed into our corporate structure?" The question gave his executive team pause. They weren't accustomed to Zane prioritizing human considerations over business strategy. "We'd retain key personnel, of course," Allen said carefully, "though there would inevitably be some redundancies." Zane nodded, thinking, "Let's take a different approach. What if we structured this as a partnership rather than an acquisition? We provide the financial stability and market access they need. They maintain their research independence and culture." Nina looked at him with surprise. "That's not our usual model. We'd have less control. True, but we might get more innovation, more genuine collaboration. Zane leaned forward. I've been thinking about our growth strategy. Getting bigger doesn't always mean getting better. Sometimes it just means more bureaucracy, more distance between leadership and the actual work. The discussion that followed was lively, with his executive team gradually warming to the partnership concept. By the end of the meeting, they had outlined a new approach that would preserve the smaller company's identity while allowing Zimmertech to benefit from their technology. As the team filed out, Nina lingered behind. That was different, she observed. A good different, but not what I expected from you. Zane smiled. People change, Nina. Or maybe they remember what mattered to them in the first place. Does this have anything to do with the architect I keep hearing about? Vivian has helped me see things from a different perspective, he acknowledged. But this isn't about her. It's about the kind of company I want to build, the kind of legacy I want to leave. Nina studied him for a moment. Well, whatever or whoever prompted this shift, I think it's positive. You seem more balanced lately, less driven maybe, but more thoughtful. Is that a diplomatic way of saying I'm losing my edge? Zane asked with a raised eyebrow. Not at all. Just that you're finding a new one. She gathered her papers. By the way, we all want to meet her sometime. The woman who's captured the attention of the most focused man I know. Zane hadn't intentionally kept Vivian separate from his professional life, but he realized Nina was right. Despite their months together, he hadn't introduced her to his closest colleagues, the people who had helped him build Zimmertech from the ground up. The holiday party is next week, he said. I'll bring her if she's willing. The annual Zimmertech holiday celebration was held at an upscale hotel, a lavish affair that brought together employees from all levels of the company. It was one of the few occasions when Zane made a point of being visible and accessible, recognizing the importance of celebrating their collective achievements. Are you sure you want me to come? Vivian asked as they discussed it that evening. It seems like a big step, introducing me to your entire company at once. Only if you're comfortable with it, Zane assured her. But yes, I'd like you there. These people are important to me, and so are you. It feels right to bring those parts of my life together. Vivian considered this. Will I be the only significant other, or do others bring partners too? Many do. It's meant to be inclusive as a thank you to the families who support our team throughout the year. All right then, she smiled. I'd be honored to be your date. The night of the party. Zane found himself unexpectedly nervous as he waited for Vivian in the lobby of her building. When she emerged, his anxiety dissolved into appreciation. She wore a deep blue gown that complemented her figure without being ostentatious, her hair swept up to reveal the elegant line of her neck. She looked beautiful, but still unmistakably herself, no attempt to transform into someone else for his corporate world. You look stunning, he said, taking her hand. Thank you. She straightened his tie with a smile. You clean up pretty well yourself. The party was in full swing when they arrived. The ballroom transformed with subtle holiday decorations and soft lighting. Zane could feel eyes turning toward them as they entered, curiosity about the woman on his arm evident in the glances and whispers. He guided Vivian through the crowd, introducing her to key members of his team. Nina was the first to approach, her handshake firm as she greeted Vivian. I've been looking forward to meeting you, she said with genuine warmth. Zane's been different since you came into his life. In a good way, she added quickly. Different how? Vivian asked, glancing at Zane with amusement. He actually leaves the office before midnight occasionally, and I caught him smiling at his phone the other day. Smiling. Zane Zimmerman. Nina shook her head in mock disbelief. It was disturbing. Zane laughed. I smile. At profit margins and successful product launches, sure, not at text messages. Vivian relaxed visibly at this easy banter, and the three of them fell into comfortable conversation about the company and its recent successes. As the evening progressed, Zane watched with pride as Vivian engaged with his colleagues, asking thoughtful questions about their work and sharing insights from her own field when relevant. "She's lovely," Alan commented when Vivian stepped away to get a drink. "And not at all what I expected." "What did you expect?" Zane asked curiously. Alan shrugged. "Someone more, I don't know, flashy, the type usually seen with successful men. Vivian is substantive. You can have a real conversation with her." "That's what drew me to her in the first place," Zane said, his eyes following Vivian across the room. "She sees beyond the surface of things." Later, as they danced to the live band playing classic holiday tunes, Vivian rested her head against his shoulder. "Your team is impressive," she said. "They clearly respect you enormously. They're the reason for Zimmertech's success. I've been fortunate to find people who share the vision." "They're also worried about you," she observed. "Several of them have mentioned how hard you work, how you never take time for yourself." Zane sighed. "They exaggerate. I'm not a martyr." "Maybe not, but you do push yourself incredibly hard." She pulled back slightly to look at him. "What would happen if you didn't? If you delegated more, trusted your team to carry more of the load?" It was a question Zane had been asking himself with increasing frequency. "The company would probably be fine," he admitted. "I've built systems, trained leaders, in many ways. My constant involvement might actually be limiting their growth. So why continue as you have been?" The answer came to him with surprising clarity. Habit, identity, fear maybe that if I step back, I'll discover I'm not as necessary as I thought. Vivian's expression softened. "Or maybe you'll discover that you've built something that can thrive even when you're not driving every decision. That might be the greater achievement, don't you think?" As the song ended, Zane pulled her closer. "When did you get so wise about business, architect?" "I'm wise about people," she corrected with a smile, "and organizations are just collections of people after all." The evening concluded with Zane giving a brief speech thanking his team for their dedication and hard work throughout the year. As he spoke, his gaze found Vivian in the crowd, her presence giving his usual words of appreciation a deeper resonance. This year, he understood better than ever the importance of balance, of finding fulfillment beyond professional accomplishment. As they left the party, snow had begun to fall, transforming the city streets into something magical. Vivian tilted her face up to the sky, catching snowflakes on her eyelashes. "I love the first snow," she said. "Everything looks new, possibilities." Zane watched her, struck by how she found joy in simple moments. It was a quality he'd lost somewhere along his drive toward success, the ability to be fully present, to appreciate beauty in the ordinary. "Move in with me," he said suddenly. Vivian turned to him, surprise evident in her expression. "What?" "I want to live together, not in my apartment or yours in the brownstone, once it's finished. I want to wake up with you every day, build a home together." The words came in a rush, unplanned but heartfelt. "I love you, Vivian. I want a life with you." She stared at him, snowflakes gathering in her hair, her expression moving from shock to something softer. "Are you sure? It's a big step, and we've only known each other for a few months." "I've never been more sure of anything." He took her hands in his. "I know it seems fast, but when it's right, and this us feels right in a way nothing else in my life ever has." A slow smile spread across Vivian's face. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I'll move in with you. Yes, I want to build a home together." Zane pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet in his excitement. Their laughter echoed in the quiet street as snow continued to fall around them, a perfect backdrop to a moment of decision, of commitment, of choosing a path forward together. The months that followed brought changes both expected and surprising. The brownstone renovation progressed under Vivian's careful supervision, the building gradually transforming from neglected historic property to a warm, inviting home that honored its past while embracing their future. At Zimmertech, Zane implemented a restructuring plan that distributed leadership responsibilities more broadly across his executive team. It wasn't a step back so much as a strategic reallocation of his time, less day-to-day management, more focus on innovation and long-term vision. The change was met with initial uncertainty but growing appreciation as his senior leaders embraced their expanded roles. "You were right," he told Vivian one evening as they walked through the nearly completed brownstone. "The company doesn't fall apart when I'm not involved in every decision. If anything, it's thriving with more diverse leadership." "I'm not surprised," she said, examining the newly restored crown molding in what would be their living room. "You hired brilliant people. They just needed the space to fully utilize their talents." Zane wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Have I told you lately how much I love you?" Not in the last hour," she teased, leaning back against him. "I might need a reminder." "I love you," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her neck. "And I love what you've created here. It's exactly what I imagined a home could be." The brownstone was indeed a masterpiece of renovation. Vivian had preserved the building's historic character while introducing modern elements that made it functional for contemporary living. Original hardwood floors gleamed beneath carefully restored light fixtures. The kitchen, though equipped with state-of-the-art appliances, maintained a timeless quality with custom cabinetry and classic finishes. Each room reflected their shared aesthetic, elegant without being pretentious, comfortable without sacrificing style. "When can we move in?" Zane asked, already imagining mornings in the sun-filled breakfast nook, evenings by the restored fireplace. "The contractors say 2 more weeks for the final details." Vivian turned in his arms to face him. "Are you sure you're ready to leave your sleek bachelor pad?" "More than ready. I want to live in a real home, with you." Moving day arrived on a crisp spring morning, almost exactly 1 year after they'd met at Marcus's birthday party. As they supervised the movers bringing their combined possessions into the brownstone, Zane was struck by how seamlessly their lives had merged. Vivian's books found homes beside his on the built-in shelves. Her artwork complemented his more traditional pieces. Even their furniture, so different in style, somehow worked together in the spaces she had designed. That evening, after the movers had left and they'd made some progress unpacking, they sat on the floor of their new living room, sharing takeout and a bottle of champagne. "To new beginnings," Zane proposed, raising his glass. "To home," Vivian countered, touching her glass to his. They drank. Then Zane set his glass aside, suddenly serious. "There's something I want to ask you, something I've been thinking about for a while now." "That sounds ominous," Vivian said, though her tone was light. "Not ominous, just important." Zane reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "I had planned a more elaborate proposal dinner at that little Italian place where we had our first real date, maybe a walk afterward to the spot where we first kissed. But sitting here, in this home we've created together, feels right." Vivian's eyes widened as he opened the box to reveal a ring, a vintage setting with a center diamond flanked by smaller sapphires, elegant without being ostentatious. "Vivian Bellamy," he said, his voice steady despite the racing of his heart. "You've changed my life in ways I never imagined possible. You've reminded me what matters, taught me to see beauty in unexpected places, shown me what it means to truly connect with another person." He took her hand. "I love you more than I thought possible, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me?" Tears glistened in Vivian's eyes as she looked from the ring to his face. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Zane. I'll marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms, sealing their engagement with a kiss that held all the promise of their future together. Later, lying in their new bed, Vivian traced patterns on his chest. Did you ever imagine, when you reluctantly showed up at that party, that you'd end up here?" Zane laughed softly. "Not even close. I was planning my escape route within 5 minutes of arriving." "So was I." She propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "Isn't it strange how the moments that change our lives often seem so ordinary at first? Just another social obligation, another evening to get through. And instead, I found you." He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "The best unexpected meeting of my life." "Mine too." She settled back against him with a contented sigh. "I love you, Zane Zimmerman, reluctant party attendee and surprise love of my life. And I love you, Vivian Bellamy, soon to be Zimmerman, fellow escape artist, and the woman I never knew I needed." As they drifted to sleep in each other's arms, in the home they had created together, Zane reflected on the winding path that had led him here. From ambitious college student to successful CEO, to a man who had finally learned that the most valuable things in life couldn't be measured in stock prices or market share. The journey hadn't been what he expected, but it had brought him exactly where he needed to be. Home at last with the woman he loved.